All right, listeners, buckle up, because we are diving into the world of commercial driving. And when I say diving in, I mean really getting into the mindset you need when you're handling a vehicle that's got some serious weight to it.
Yeah, the responsibility factor is huge, right? It's not just about knowing how to drive, but really understanding how your actions out there on the road can impact, well, everyone else.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating, especially for our listeners prepping for their CDL. We're digging into the 2005 Commercial Driver License Manual you sent us, specifically those sections on seeing and communicating 2.4 and 2.5, right?
That's right. And you might think, oh, manuals, how exciting. But let me tell you, this stuff is gold even for seasoned drivers.
Yeah, you think you know the basics, but then, bam, the manual hits you with this whole concept of seeing ahead. And it's not just about checking your mirrors, it's next level awareness.
Exactly. It's like, remember when you were a kid and learned, look both ways before crossing? This is like that, but on a highway at 60 miles an hour with tons of metal around you?
No kidding. They're talking about looking 12 to 15 seconds ahead, which sounds crazy at first, but when you think about it,
It's all about physics. A big rig, it's not like a car. Starting distance, the time it takes to react, it's all magnified.
so this isn't just being extra cautious, it's literally understanding that if something goes down a quarter mile ahead of you on the highway, you need that time to even process it, let alone hit the brakes.
And that's a skill. Building that instinct to scan so far ahead, it's not something you just pick up overnight.
Makes you realize how much practice goes into not just passing the CDL test, but really being behind the wheel of a rig like that. It's like you're not just driving, you're conducting traffic almost.
Exactly. You've got to think several moves ahead, like a chess game, because that momentum, once you get going,
It's a whole different ballgame. So looking ahead isn't just defensive driving, it's like strategic driving.
and that's just the start. We haven't even gotten into how you communicate all that to the cars around you, which is where things get really interesting.
So we've talked about seeing ahead, but what about letting those other drivers know what you're up to, especially when you're driving a vehicle that's basically the size of a small apartment?
Right. You can't exactly just rely on waving your arms out the window.
Exactly. And that's where those communication skills come in. This manual, it really gets into the nitty-gritty of using your vehicle itself to speak to other drivers.
Yeah, it's like a whole different language. And the first word in that language is definitely turn signals.
Turn signals. Gotta love them, right?
Seriously, though, they're not optional, especially in a big rig. Think about it. Even in a car, if you see a truck making a sudden lane change, your heart skips a beat.
Oh, absolutely. You give those guys a wide berth.
Exactly. So as the truck driver, you've got to signal early, signal often, give everyone a heads up.
No cutting it close. So, turn signals? Check. What about when you need to slow down but you're not turning? Is it cool to, like, tap your brakes just to flash those brake lights as a warning?
Actually, yeah, the manual mentions that. A little tap on the brakes can be a good way to get the attention of the drivers behind you.
Like a heads up something's happening kind of thing.
Exactly. Of course, you still got to use those brakes for real when you need them.
For sure. Okay, so we've covered signals, braking. What about those mirrors? I've always been a little curious about those curved ones, the fisheye mirrors. They make everything look kind of small and far away.
Those are great for giving you a wider field of view, crucial when you've got those big old blind spots to worry about.
So you see more, but you have to adjust for the distortion.
Exactly. It takes some getting used to, but that extra visibility is invaluable. But even with those, you still got to be super diligent about checking your mirrors constantly.
Yeah, especially before lane changes, turns, all that jazz. It's like a dance,
Yeah.
right? Eyes constantly moving, checking mirrors, scanning the road ahead.
That's a great way to put it. You got to be aware of everything around you. And there's one more thing the manual stresses, and it's about what not to do.
Oh, this is interesting. What's the no-no?
Don't play traffic cop.
What do you mean?
You know how some people try to be helpful by waving others to pass or using hand signals to say it's clear?
Oh, yeah, like they're directing traffic themselves.
Right. Well, the manual explicitly warns against that for commercial drivers.
Really? Why is that?
Yeah.
You'd think with their high vantage point, they'd be in a good spot to see if it's safe to pass.
It seems like a good deed, but it can lead to some serious liability issues.
So no matter how good your intentions are, waving someone past you when you're driving a big rig, that's a big no-no.
Yeah, you're opening yourself up to a world of trouble if something goes wrong. It's like suddenly you're responsible for someone else's decision making.
Definitely not worth the risk. It's a good reminder to focus on what you can control your own vehicle and your own communication. Speaking of which, The manual also gets into this whole idea of being seen, even when you might not think it's a big deal.
Right, like those times when visibility is low dawn, dusk, bad weather. People don't always think about headlights then.
Oh yeah, like, it's not totally dark yet, but really.
Those headlights, they make a huge difference. The manual's really clear about that. And not just those little running lights either.
Right, the real deal headlights, so
Mhm.
other drivers can actually see you.
Exactly. And this whole be seen thing, it's even more important when you're parked on the side of the road.
You'd think hazard lights would be enough, wouldn't you?
Well, the manual actually stresses using your four-way flashers when you're parked like that, especially at night, because those taillights, they can trick people into thinking you're moving.
Oh, tell me about it. You're driving along and bam, there's a parked car you almost rear-ended.
Exactly. So those four-way flashers, they're like a beacon saying, hey, I'm stopped here. Watch out. And while we're on the topic of being stopped, let's talk about those warning triangles for a sec.
Oh yeah, the reflective ones you put behind the truck.
Hmm.
I'll admit, I'm always a little unsure about how far back they need to be.
Well, the manual's got your back literally. It lays out the exact distances, no guesswork required. And it's not just about other drivers seeing you, it's about creating a safe zone for yourself while you're working outside the vehicle.
That's a great point. It's easy to forget about those little things, but they can make all the difference.
Absolutely. It all comes back to that awareness, that constant communication, whether you're cruising down the highway or pulled over for a break.
Well, I feel like I've learned a ton in this deep dive, and I hope our listeners have too. We talked about seeing ahead, communicating your intentions, being visible even when you think you are.
It's a lot to take in, but the main takeaway is that driving a big rig, it's a whole different ballgame. It's not just about knowing the rules, it's about really internalizing them, making them second nature.
So to all our listeners out there hitting the books for their CDL or even just driving their everyday vehicles, remember, stay focused, stay aware, and never underestimate the power of a good turn signal.